Tolakaren, friends and foes. Here follows an account of the War of the Last Alliance, for all those who have displayed interest in the history of the Second Age and want it fulfilled with the war that ended it. An interest triggered by the mod DCI Last Alliance, or mere Middle-earth history. It will have a touch of repetition at start, but for the history leading up till the war, feel welcome to see my previous videos. The war starts in the year 3429 of the Second Age, when the Dark Lord makes a surprise attack and captures Minas Ithil, the fortress of Isildur in Gondor, that were to guard the pass into Mordor. King Isildur escapes down the river Anduin with his family and a seedling of the White Tree, to go north to Arnor and ask his father for aid. His brother, King Anarion, defend the land until his brother might return with support, or Gondor will be doomed. It is not known, but I would assume that it was at this time that Isildur turned to the King of the Mountains and requested them to send aid against Gondor's enemies. But long ago the mountain men had worshipped the Dark Lord, and they remember him in their hearts, so they do not dare to fight him, and so break their oath to Isildur. Isildur then lay his curse upon them, to never rest until their oath is fulfilled, if the West proves mightier than their Black Master. They then flee before the wrath of Isildur, and do not dare to fight for Sauron either. The men of the mountains hide themselves in the mountains, slowly dwindling till extinction in the barren hills, becoming haunted spirits. While Isildur comes to Arnor and speaks with his father Elendil, Elendil turns to his friend Gil-galad of Lindon, who has fought Sauron in previous wars. If they do not unite, the two High King knows Sauron will defeat them one by one, and in the year 3430 they form that league that later become known as the Last Alliance of Elves and Men. In 3431 Gil-galad meet Elendil at Amon Sul, a great watchtower that Elendil has erected at the Weathertop. Until 3434 they muster their forces of elves and men of Eriador at Imladris, the stronghold held by Lord Elrond, who is Gil-galad's herald and vice-regent. First, in the year 3434, they cross the Misty Mountains and march for Mordor. During this time, between 3430 and 3434, Gondor fights valiantly and Anarion holds Osgiliath. Gil-galad sends messages east to call for aid. In Lothlorien, King Amdir heed his old friends and allies, and the Sylvan Elves of Lothlorien arm themselves, ready to make war. Across the river, the Sylvan Elves of Eringalen are not interested in the affairs of other peoples, but their King Oropher is wise. Even if he do not like the Noldor Elves, he understands that Sauron must be stopped, and choose to join with Amdir of Lothlorien. Likewise, the Northmen of the Vale of Anduin and Eringalen, called the Woodsmen, ally themselves with Sauron's enemies. The Orcs of the Misty Mountains also muster. Sauron, well informed of the alliance, had sent out such orc troops of the Red Eye as he could spare, to support and lead them. They are ordered to harry any forces that attempt to shorten their road by crossing the mountains at the passes of Imladris and Caradhras. In other parts of the mountains, dwarfs do not take official side in the war, but those Longbeards who joins nonetheless all side with the alliance. Sauron have great power in Middle-earth, even if the years he spent on Númenor has weakened his influence, and he can no longer muster such forces as he once could. From the east and south, Sauron still bring in vast amounts of warriors, and not a few of them are remnants of the Kingsmen, known as the Black Númenorians. From the uncharted east we however have an account that suggests that Sauron faced opposition. To avoid contradictions, these forces of good remain of uncertain kind and origin, but without that resistance the West might have been overwhelmed during the war. In 3434 the mighty Alliance army at Imladris crossed the mountains at last. The orcs are dismayed by their strength and hide themselves instead of attacking, but they remain alert and watchful, determined to attack any companies of elves or men that they outnumber. Marching down the Vale of Anduin, the might of Gil-galad and Elendil is swelled by the armies of Lothlorien and Erungalen, but also by Northmen and dwarves, and, for what we are told, also by beasts and ents. North of Mordor lies a land inhabited by men and the Entwives, who held themselves with gardens and were teachers of men in the art of agriculture. Sauron pursues a scorched earth policy against the advance of the Alliance down the Anduin, so the land is now burnt and uprooted. The fate of the Entwives is unknown, to the Ents' great sorrow, and the region becomes known as the Brownlands forever on. The Dark Lord now make ready for a decisive battle. The Alliance came at last upon the host of Sauron on Dagorlad, the battle plain, which lies before the gate of the Black Land. All living things are said to have been divided in that day, and some of every kind, even of beasts and birds, were found on either side, save the elves only. This has led to some controversy, but I may address that topic some other time, if desired. The Sylvan elves, hardy and valiant, but ill-equipped in comparison with the Eldar of the West, are independent and do not place themselves under supreme command of Gil-galad. Their losses proves, therefore, more grievous than they would have needed to be, even in this terrible war. Amdir and more than half of his Lothlorien army perish in this battle, being cut off from the main host and driven into the dead marshes. Yet the host of Gil-galad and Elendil have the victory, for the might of the elves is still great, and the Númenorians are strong and tall, and terrible in their wrath. Against Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad, none can stand, and the sword of Elendil, Narsil, fill orcs and men with fear, for it radiates with the light of the sun and the moon. The Alliance then invade the land of Sauron. True to his people's temper, Orofer is slain in the first assault upon Mordor, taking the head with his most doughty warriors, before Gil-galad has even given the signal for the advance. His son, Thranduil, survives, but when the war ends, he will lead back home barely a third of the army that had marched out to war. Now the Alliance encompass the stronghold of Sauron, and they lay siege to Barad-dûr for 7 years, from 3434 to 3441. In that siege they suffer grievous losses of fire, and by darts, and by bolts of the enemy, and Sauron sent many sorties against them. Isildur's 2 sons, Aratan and Kirion, was not in the invasion of Mordor, or are at the siege of Barad-dûr. Isildur had sent them to man his fortress of Minas Ithil, in case Sauron should escape and seek to force a way through Cirith Dûath, later called Cirith Ungol. King Anarion, son of Elendil, is slain during the siege, as so many others, yet the Dark Lord remains unable to break loose. At last, in 3441, the siege is so strait that Sauron himself comes forth. On the slopes of Mount Doom he wrestles with Gil-galad and Elendil, and the last stand is beheld by Elrond, Círdan, and Isildur. Sauron's hand is black and yet burn like fire, and so High King Gil-galad is destroyed, while the sword of Elendil breaks under him as he fall. But Sauron also is thrown down in the combat. With the hilt shard of Narsil, Isildur cuts the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and takes it for its own. Then Sauron is for this time defeated, and he forsakes his body, and his spirits flee away and hide in waste places, and is not made manifest again for long years. The Second Age ends, and the Third Age begins. Elrond and Círdan advise Isildur to throw the ring into Mount Doom, even if they do not then understand the importance it will have. Isildur, however, influenced by the ring itself, desires to keep it as Wergild for Elendil and Anarion. He goes to Gondor, and, in year 2 of the Third Age, he plants the White Tree in memory of his brother. Anarion's son Meneldil is made king of Gondor, while Isildur is king of Arnor, but he maintained the title of High King over the Dúnedain in both south and north. Later that same year he moves north through the Vale of Anduin to get to Imladris, where his wife and youngest son are found, but also to speak to Elrond again. The orcs in the Misty Mountains do not yet know Sauron has fallen, and while they did not dare to attack Thranduil and his returning Sylvan host, they consider Isildur, his sons, and their 200 knights on foot easy prey, but they are also driven by the ring. At the Gladden Fields, Isildur realizes his folly, but his 3 sons and almost all his men are killed in the disaster. Isildur himself dies in the river Anduin, betrayed by the One Ring, when he tries to escape from the orcs so that he may hand over the ring to the wise for destruction. But if the ring intended to be taken by the orcs, it failed, and remains on the bottom of the river for another 2,500 years. The losses of men in the war proved so great that Arnor never returns to its former strength, and after Isildur's death, Gondor and Arnor remains independent until Aragorn's time. But the losses of elves had also been great, with important consequences. Never again will there be such a league between elves and men, for men multiply and the firstborn decreases, and the 2 kindreds are estranged. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode and got an overview of the War of the Last Alliance.